Did I hear?
There they are. Hey guys.
Hey, Philip. Hey, Philip.
Hey, good to see you. Gabby, I was just saying it's kind of like you to Miss BBS.
No, I wouldn't dare miss VBS. It's one of my favorite things ever. Well, that and taking care of my pigs. Oh, and hanging out with the youth group.
Well, I bet you guys are going to have a lot of great things to learn about tonight.
I think that's a great idea, Philip. We are so excited to hear more about Moses and the Israelites.
Well, I wonder, what some of the stuff that you guys are, what some of the things that you guys are going to learn about? Hayden, do you think you'll be doing some of the same activities that you did last night?
Well, I don't know, but last night I got so pumped up that I went home and looked at throwing videos, so I am completely ready for tonight.
Did any of you guys do the throwing videos last night? During the throwing activity last night? Pretty good at it? I think I was probably best. Well, Hayden, I don't know that they'll be doing the same things tonight that you did last night. They may be doing some new things.
What do you mean? All my research was useless?
Yep, you should have been working on your Moses trivia so you could get more coins tonight. I knew you were saving up for those McDonald's gift cards.
Well, I didn't think of that. I'm never going to get enough coins to get that McDonald's gift card.
Well, hey, you're off to a good start because you got to remember what I said a minute ago. If you brought a friend tonight, you were going to get it. So keep that in mind tomorrow night if you come back. Bring the friend with you. So, Hayden, you're going to get a coin, aren't you?
Oh boy, yes I am.
Guys, let's go ahead and let's sing a song. You guys have a suggestion?
Philip, can we sing If You Love Jesus?
Oh man, that is one of my favorite songs. How many of you guys know that song? You do? Oh man, you can come up and help me lead it, Nolan. You can come on up if you want. Why don't you guys stand up? Let's do it. Let's do it, guys. Are you guys ready? Okay. You gotta be loud. If you love Jesus. Let's try it again. Okay. You're gonna repeat after me. Okay? All right. If you love Jesus.
Jesus.
Clap your hands.
Na 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 na. Hey, na 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 na. Ha. Suck to the devil. Of Jesus.
Stomp your feet. Right. So, oh, there he is. Let's watch.
Welcome, everyone. Glad to see you again. I'm really thankful we've got this fire here tonight. But unfortunately, I don't have any food or drink to offer you. See, we're kind of short on supplies out here in the desert. It's been kind of rough. I've been hearing a lot of whining from my people, the Israelites. You know, it seems that's what my people do. Whine and complain. Whine and complain. First, they didn't trust God when he let us out of Egypt safely. But he did, a miracle. But that wasn't good enough. Then they started complaining about being thirsty. Found some water, it was bitter. But God heard their complaint, and he turned the water to some wonderful drinking water. Still, they're not happy. I don't understand. You know, God provides what we need, so trust God. Through this whole wilderness journey, we found that God gives us what we need. So trust God. But they still whine. Now they're complaining about food.
Food? Did I hear someone say food? That's just what I want to talk to you about, Moses.
Yeah, we're hungry, Moses. Did you bring us out to the wilderness to starve, Moses?
Well, hi, Malachi, Nahum. You know, my friends and I, we were just talking. God gives us everything we need, so trust God.
Why do you people do that? Anyway, back to food. I wish God would give us some, Moses. We need to talk.
Here we go. Let the whining begin. I think maybe we should call them the wilderness whiners.
I totally heard that, Moses. I wasn't gonna whine, but I'm hungry. We had lots of food back in Egypt.
Yeah, we had all the meat and bread we wanted. But now you brought us out here to starve. We're hungry, Moses, hungry.
Do you have any extra food? I sure could use a turtle burger like back in Egypt. That was my favorite.
We're gonna starve, Moses.
No, you're taking so long. This was completely pointless. Come on, let's go to the next.
You know, I don't know why my people are so upset. Seems simple to me. God gives us what we need, so trust God. In fact, God told me he already heard people's complaints, and he's going to do something about it. He said he'll rain down meat in the evening and bread in the morning. Let's see if there's anything out there. Wow. When God says he'll do something, he delivers. This ground is covered with quail, meat we can eat. Thank you. I'm going to take this over the fire and roast it. I don't know about you, a big together like that makes me tired. It's time to hit the hay, or well, the sand anyway. I can't wait to see what God does in the morning. He said there will be bread, and we know that God gives us what we need. So, trust God. Good night. Let's see what God did. Wow. Look. God delivered again. He's amazing. There's bread all over the ground. This is amazing bread. I've never seen anything like it before. God said each family should gather enough of this bread each day for one day's use, except for the day before the Sabbath. And then you gather enough for 2 days because we don't work on the Sabbath. This is some unusual bread, isn't it? My people call it manna, which means, what is it? I think that's a good name for it. Since no one's ever seen this kind of bread before, God is awesome. God gives us what we need, so trust God. Well, friends, I have to get going. I'll see you back at the tent later.
right. How do I sound? It's pretty loud. Oh, man, that's loud. Is it too loud? Elsie, is that too loud? Not too bad? Not too loud? All right. Well, welcome, everybody. I'll back up just a little bit so I can see you over there. That turned too far. Well, this is our second night of VBS, and we're going to be talking about God providing. I can't remember what they said. God gives us what we need, okay? Trust in God. We're going to be in Exodus 16, 1 through 21. And any of you that have ever been in my class on Sunday mornings, that's a stretch saying we're going to get through 1 through 21, trust me. But we're going to do what we can. Starting in chapter 16, verse 1, you know, the Egyptians, and we know the story, and we're going to talk some about the story and how it applies, and you know, put ourselves in their position and see how we think we would have acted. But at this point in Exodus 16, they've already crossed the Red Sea, and we talked about that last night. But they've already gone through the Red Sea, got away from the Egyptians, got to Marah. The water was bitter, and like Moses talked about this evening, the children of Israel complained, and God instructed Moses to throw a branch in the spring or the body of water that was there, and it all became sweet. And they stayed there a while. It was like an oasis there that they stayed at. Now, that's a big deal, water in the desert. We need to remember that. And so I can't say that I wouldn't have been grumbling myself had there been a situation where there was no water and we're traveling in the desert. And we talked a little bit about the group that we're dealing with here had been in a place for 400 years or so. They'd been told what to do for the last several, I don't even know how much time, probably 100 years in deep slavery. And now you've got a group that's free, and now they're wondering, okay? Things have been provided for them their whole life. We're talking 400 years, so we have a group of people that never knew any different, okay? We had a group of people that food was provided, shelter was provided, all those things that we take for granted, I guess, they took for granted too, because there was always meat in the pot, there was always plenty to eat, plenty of water to drink, and it was provided by somebody else. It's not something that they had to provide for themselves, per se. I mean, there was a lot of work getting done, but so now you've got a group of people that's wandering around in the desert, don't know how to provide for themselves, and especially in the desert, it's not an easy thing to just say, well, I'll just go get a drink of water, okay? And so the water was provided, but they were grumbling about not having enough to eat. And we talked about last night how many people this probably was. And we're going to stick with 1 million because it's easier for me to do the math. I'm not a mathematician, so it's easier for me to do the math if we just stick with 1 million, and we can start talking about how much that actually is. And so another test is on the way after the water, because now they're getting hungry. So I'm going to read the 21 verses, and then we're going to talk about them. So, then they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the sons of Israel came to the wilderness.
which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month. So we're a month and a half in. That's important. It's a month and a half. And the whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the sons of Israel said to them, would that we would have died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to our full. For you've brought us out in the wilderness to kill us, this whole assembly, with hunger. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them. It's another important statement. Remember that I may test them, whether or not they will walk in my instructions. So whether or not they're going to do what I say. And it'll come about on the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it'll be twice as much as they gather daily, because on the Sabbath they won't be gathering. So Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel all these things. At evening you will know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord. For he hears your grumblings against the Lord. And what are we that you grumble against us? Said Moses. This will happen when the Lord gives you meat in the evening and bread to the full in the morning. For the Lord hears your grumblings, which you grumble against him. And what are we? Your grumblings are not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, say to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, come near, for he has heard your grumblings. And it came about, as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the sons of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in a cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I've heard the grumblings of the sons of Israel. Speak to them, saying, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. So it came about at evening that the quails came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew on the ground. Then the layer of dew evaporated, and behold, the surface of the wilderness, there was a fine flake, fine as the frost on the ground. And when the sons of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, it's the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather it, every man as much as he should eat. You shall take an omer apiece, according to the number of persons each of you has in his tent. And the sons of Israel did so, and some gathered much and some little. And when they measured it with an omer, he who had gathered much had no excess, and he who had gathered little had no lack. Every man gathered as much as he should eat. And Moses said to them, let no man leave any of it until morning. But they did not listen to Moses, and some left part of it till morning. And it bred worms and became foul, and Moses was angry with them. And they gathered it morning by morning, every man as much as he should eat. But when the sun grew hot, it would melt. So, there's a lot going on here. And we're going to talk about how much that was, okay? And we're going to talk about how much God provided for his children. So, an omer, we don't use that, right? An omer, I looked it up. Depending on who you look at, it's between 3 and 4 pounds. An omer is, and we're going to go with 3, because now we're back on my math again, and it makes it easier for me to do the math. So if we have 1 million people, and each of those people gets 3 pounds of bread, that's 3 million pounds of bread every day, 6 days a week, actually 7 days a week, because they get twice as much on the. So God provided 3 million pounds of bread a day for 40 years. And don't forget that part of it, because they wandered around for 40 years. And they had bread every day for 40 years. That's a lot. That's a lot. I'm just going to say that's a lot, okay? We're going to leave it at that, because you guys know how much that is. That's a lot, okay? And they had to work for it. God gave it to them, But what did he tell them? They had to gather it. They had to gather it every morning. In order for them to have something to eat that day, they had to gather that bread. And I read a lot about the bread, and it wasn't necessarily just how we would use bread. They boiled it, and they cooked it, and they baked it, and they did all kind of different things with it, but it was still provided from God. Okay? And if we go over to Numbers, it talks about the quail, and it's kind of in Exodus. I don't know if this is talking about the same quail that Numbers is talking about, because in Exodus it talks about the quail first. Talks about the quail and then talks about the manna, and it didn't seem unusual. But in Numbers, it talks about them wanting meat, and they hadn't seen the manna yet. Irregardless, in Numbers, when they complained that they didn't have any meat, he sent in the quail. Okay? He sent in quail 3 feet deep for a day's walk in every direction of the camp. Okay? Three feet deep, 10 quail for every person in camp, more than they could eat ever for a month. Okay? So he sent 3 feet of quail through the camp, and as far as you could walk in a day from any direction over the camp for a month. Just to spite them, I think, because they were complaining. It's just like a kid, just like children, and this used to be the thing back when I was a kid. If you wanted to smoke, okay, your dad would just, my dad was in the Navy. If you want to smoke, okay. Here's the pack. Let's go. Light it up and smoke every one of those cigarettes in that pack until he didn't care you're puking your guts out. He didn't care. And then you'll decide whether or not you want to smoke or not, okay? Or anything else that you want to, if you happen to eat, steal a cookie out of the cookie jar, you get to eat all the cookies in the cookie jar until you just didn't want any more cookies, okay? So I can imagine that their minds changed and their complaint has changed now from we don't have any meat to, oh, we've got all this meat, okay? And has anybody ever worked in a chicken house? There's a byproduct of birds, isn't there? I can't imagine quail 3 feet deep for as far as you could walk for a day would be a very pleasant aroma, even after they were gone. And you can't eat all of them. And the noise, the roar of what would have been, quails make a funny noise. You guys ever heard a quail? Depending on what kind of quail it was, but they make a funny noise. But you multiply that times the millions, and you have this drone of noise. So that goes along with one of those other sayings that, be careful what you wish for, and you might just end up with it. And that's kind of what we see in what's going on with the grumbling.
In the first probably year they were excited to have it, but just thinking, after 30 years of doing this?
After 40 years, that's exactly right. And that's why I was mentioning that they cooked it different ways. And God had a plan. God had a plan in the wilderness. He didn't, and it's hard for me to, hunger and thirst are some of those things that you just can't get away from.
And what? It almost seems like God has a sense of humor.
Absolutely.
Quail?
You got quail.
Make you so sick of quail.
You'll never want another quail in your life. That's exactly right. And so, as they, God was testing them. Okay, so, and I don't know if testing is the word that I would use, but he gave them something that they didn't know what it was. Okay, remember that, because God blessed them with something they didn't know what it was.
I think maybe he was teaching from what they tested.
He was teaching.
Well,
He,
this is where if they got more than they were supposed to, the manna
it rotted. It got foul, and it had worms in it, maggots or worms or whatever, to the point where you couldn't be in the tent with it. So he was training. He was training his people to obey his word, and he was training them why to obey his word. He was trying to make them understand that God provides. And like I said, they're just a month and a half in from the Red Sea. Everything that happened in Egypt, them being released with, you know, the spoils of Egypt. They've got their freedom. They're going to a place. You know, they have a place to go. They're not just, it seems like, you know, after they start wandering around aimlessly, but they had a promise that they were looking for. And yet, well, it didn't even take that long, because we can look at at the mount when they got the 10 Commandments. It didn't take, you know, how long was Moses up on the mountain? 40 days. Yeah. So just, we have hindsight, and we have 20/20 hindsight, and we can say, I would never do that. How could they possibly do that? But if you're starving in the desert, you're probably going to ask for food. And you're probably going to ask the guy that you followed out of Egypt for that food. And ask him it's a valid question, okay? It's a valid question, where are we going to get food and where are we going to get water to feed 1 million people every day, day in and day out? And as they're asking that question and complaining about it, I don't know that they asked the question, they just complained that they didn't have what they had. They complained to Moses that he was just trying to starve them to death in the desert, okay? If you look at it from a different direction, if they would have just said, Moses, how are we going to survive? You know, what are we going to eat? And Moses said, God will provide. And you know that God has done all of those things up until this point, you would probably, I would think that they would have a different attitude towards Moses and his promise, and that God would provide. But God just lets them grumble and then shows them what he's going to do, shows them his provision, and it doesn't work out the way they planned, okay? So a lot of times in the lives we live, and God provides for us, we don't recognize God's provision in our lives, okay? Absolutely, absolutely. And we complain, and we grumble, and we know who to talk to, the guy in charge of the thermostat, okay? Or the preacher if he goes too long, or, the mamas that won't keep the kids quiet, or a plethora of things that we find either irritating or I don't know. It turns into, it's my world, you guys are just living in it. You know, everything revolves around me, and you guys are just going to have to make do with what you got. And so that's kind of the attitude we've bred in our society today, and it's hard to see God's provision. We don't recognize God's blessings because we don't acknowledge God as the blessing giver, okay? We acknowledge God as the punisher, okay? It went wrong, I did something wrong, but all the good things, well, I did that on my own. That was me. I did that. God helped a little bit here and there, but for the most part, I worked hard and it was all me. I did it, And so, as we look at that attitude, I don't even know if it's an attitude, but and the scriptures talk about it wasn't just a few grumbling, okay? It wasn't just a sect or one group or one part of a group or even half of the group. It was everybody, okay? But everybody was affected by the grumbling, but everybody was blessed by God's provision. And so, and it talked about in the lesson that God was going to test his people to see if they would do what he asked them to do. And the first night, there was a group of them that saved more. Well, we might need this for the morning because what if God doesn't send the bread? We're going to be hungry tomorrow. We were hungry yesterday. We might need that. And it rotted. And so we can see that not recognizing God's blessings can be a curse. And I don't know if curse is the right word, but recognizing blessings is good, so not recognizing God's blessings can turn bad. We'll just say it that way. And we also find that need and want become very separate in the desert. Okay, they needed water and they needed food. They needed that. Now they wanted the delicacies that they had in Egypt. They wanted food provided for them that they were used to. Like Theo talked about in his skit, those turtle sandwiches or whatever it was he was talking about. There were certain things they were used to having that they no longer had. And so I think God is training his people up to accept him as the provider, to recognize his provision, and also to in Numbers it talks about it, but he does a lot of weeding out also. The ones that were grumbling about the quail, it became a plague to them. The quail became a plague to them, and a lot of them died. And so they had everything they needed, not more and not less. Okay, they had exactly what they needed, and they had exactly what they needed from God. Okay, and so as God proved himself as provider, that was we're going to call that a learning experience, because God took that situation of complaining and a poor attitude, and he used it as an opportunity to not only discipline, but disciple his people, bring them an understanding and a love for God that they had forgotten over the last 400 years, okay? Bring them to a new history and a promise that was close, that they had, they understood the promise of Abraham, or promise to Abraham. They understood the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, with vineyards they didn't plant, and olive groves they didn't. all of the things that were going to once again be provided without them having to work for it, because God was going to provide. Okay? Now, it wasn't that it was not going to take work, because it was. Just like they had to gather, they had to take the land. And so, in the beginning, as they were grumbling, the scripture, Moses was like, "Why are you grumbling to me? I'm just like you. I'm hungry just like you. I'm thirsty just like you. You're not grumbling against me and Aaron. You're grumbling against God." And so he called them out on it, and they didn't care. It doesn't seem. And it was, a physically demanding situation that they were in. Okay, I don't know that I've ever been hungry. Like I've been hungry, but not hungry. And there are probably members sitting in this room that have been hungry, and not know where the next meal was going to come from, not know if they were going to have to go to bed, hungry. You ate what you had. You ate what was provided for you, Jerry Clower used to say they'd eat green apples for breakfast and drink water for lunch and just swell up for supper, And so it's just, it's hard to not be empathetic towards their plight, I guess. And yet, I still feel like I can look back on what God had done up to that point. God had done for them up to that point. They didn't do anything to deserve being exiled out of slavery. Okay? They didn't do anything to deserve that. They cried out to God, and God provided them an escape from slavery. Okay? So now, as God is providing for them, they haven't done anything to earn God's provision. Okay? As a matter of fact, they've actually grumbled against God in his provision. And yet, he's still provided. Okay? For 40 years, 3 tons a day, every day, twice on Sundays, whatever. It was just the provision, I think, is what was training them to rely on God. They couldn't rely on themselves in the desert for water. They can't make water. They could probably find water, but it wouldn't be easy. They couldn't, they weren't going to drill for water. And they weren't going to just come upon enough water for 1 million people every day for 40 years. Okay? So they had to trust God for provision. Okay? And then they were thirsty, and Moses smacked the rock, and water came out. I'd like to sing that, because you're talking, that's a lot of water, because the water that came out of that rock, and I don't know how big the rock was, but the water that came out of that rock provided for not only the 1 million people that needed the water, all their cattle, all their sheep, all their probably camels and donkeys and all the stuff you see when you think about what the time was like back then, all of their livestock, okay? That's a lot of water. And God provided that for them out of a rock, okay? And in my mind, which is, if I see that, okay, if I'm wandering around in the desert and I'm thirsty, Moses smacks a rock and enough water comes out for everybody and every animal and everything, why would I ever question God? Ever. Why would I have it in my mind to ever even think twice about what God would say and what he would do? Why would I consider grumbling about his provision? You know, I look at all of those things and I think, I do the same thing today. I do exactly the same thing today. I can look back on my life. I'm old enough now that I can look back on my life. You're not old enough yet, but you will be. I can look back on my life and see God's blessings in my life, okay? Blessings that I was not thankful for, blessings that I was not aware of, blessings I didn't know were blessings that brought me to where I am right now. And when you look back on those kind of things, it has to turn your mind towards why did I not praise God more for those blessings? Why was I not more thankful and grateful? Why did I grumble about not having enough money, not having a better job, not having, the weather, whatever it may be that we've complained about through our lives that amount to nothing when we, you make your lists. When you put your list of what God has provided next to the nonsense that we come up with, there's no comparison. There's no comparison at all.
They probably complained because they had to go get the water and it wasn't brought to them.
And that's exactly right. They had to gather the bread of the morning, And it's a spiritual problem reflected in the hearts of people. Because what's in your heart's going to come out. So if grumbling is in your heart, you're going to hear the grumbling. And so they were questioning God's ability to provide. Okay? That's that's a slap in the face. Okay? When you question, and we can put it in human terms, when you question somebody's ability to do something that they've always done, okay? I fix cars for a living. So if someone questions me about a car repair that I've done 1,000 times, it can grate on you. It can grate on you. And the thing is, I've had this happen multiple times over my career. That's not it. What else could it be? Okay? That's not it. What else could it be? Well, I don't know what else it could be, but I'm telling you what it is. Okay? And, we talk to God the same way. That's not the blessing I asked for. What else you got? What else you got? Bread's not good enough. What else you got? Quail? Yeah, we'll take some. We don't want any more quail. That's enough. What else you got? Okay? What else can you do for me? When we should be asking, what else, God, can we do for you? How else can I live my life to praise your name, to do what you want me to do? Not save for tomorrow, not hide in my tent, or whatever it is, the tent of my heart. None of those things. But what can I do to glorify God in his provision for my daily existence? Okay?
If you think about it, though, how long had they been in slavery?
Well, they had been in Egypt 400 years. They had been in slavery when they forgot who Joseph was. And I don't know, it's probably at least 100 years,
So, a lot of these people
Absolutely.
They could be saying, you know, it gave us food, but it's going to keep on going.
Right. And that's the difficult part of that. And yet God gave them the opportunity to do what he said. Okay? And that's when he was training them up. Not only did he give them the opportunity to do what he said, even through the grumbling and the disobedience, he still provided. And through the disobedience and the grumbling of some, he still provided for all. Okay? And so we learn a little bit about the heart of God, because that's what he was doing. He was forging his people. He was making his people his people. You know, he was I don't know, hardening. I just think that he was remaking his people, okay? Because all the people that left Egypt didn't get to the promised land, okay? If you were like over 20 years old, you didn't go, you know. Moses didn't go, you know. And so through all the provision, God still expects you to honor his wish, to do his will, and not complain, okay? Even though as a human being I can see why. I can see why they complain. And I'm not a complainer, but I can still see where the attitude came from, okay? A lot of fear. I can't imagine the fear that they had lived with from the moment they left Egypt till the moment the Red Sea collapsed on the Egyptians. Right up until that moment, that had to have been a huge fear. And then when that goes away, now they have a different fear. What are we going to drink? And when God provides that, they have a different fear. What are we going to eat? And it just continues that way.
They had heard from God for a long time.
That's exactly right. And
Spent a lot of time in Egypt by themselves.
by themselves. And, you know, I don't know that we have any insight as to why that was, but it was so that God could bring them out in a miraculous way that everyone would know that the God of Israel is alive and powerful and there. And, you know, the word spread, the word spread obviously to Jericho and all those places. But the other thing that and it's time to go, but I wanted to talk about one more thing that I thought was just the most interesting. I don't know that most interesting, but of those provisions, they talk about it in Numbers and a couple different other places, but their clothes never wore out. Their sandals never wore out. Their feet never got tired. And a lot of us in here have gotten older, and we creak when we stand up and all those things, and we wonder what happened to my youth. And I don't remember what it was like for my knees not to hurt, my back not to hurt, my neck not to hurt, and I don't remember what it was like to not be like that. Okay, they didn't have any of that for the 40 years of wandering in the desert. None of their stuff wore out. It didn't rot. It didn't, nothing. And the interesting part of that to me was their feet never got sore. They're wandering around in the desert, basically barefoot, but with sandals, and their feet never got sore. So, as we go through our lives, okay, let's do God's will, follow what He says for us to do, accept His provision, and praise God for it, and don't let your feet get tired. Eat more quail.
Talking about the quail, if they had 10 quail per person,
That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff. Yes, Mike? Yeah, God did provide. Right. And they put it in the ark. And that's right. And to recognize God's provision, okay? And it's time to go. But the other thing I want to say, we don't get to choose how God blesses us. You know? We have to accept God's blessing, okay? We can ask. We can wonder. And it may be what we want is what we need. And so it may align with what God wants. But God provides what we need, as much as we need, and not any more than what we need. And so as we'll remember that. Thank you for your attention and your comments.
Today's Rick's birthday. We ought to sing happy birthday to him.
Yeah, we ought to, but we're not gonna.